Hi, this is Carl at Technical Enduro Skills Training School. In today's video we're going to look at how to set your bike up for hard enduro, extreme enduro events, also general technical riding. When it comes to setting your bike up for those sorts of events, usually it's all about protection of the bike. It's always a bit of a compromise. The more stuff you bolt on, the heavier the bike gets, the more it can affect your energy levels, the more it can affect the maneuverability of the bike. So everything that we'll talk about today is what we do. We've learned some lessons along the way. We've done Romaniacs a couple of times, Impi Enduro, Roof of Africa, a six-day crazy job in Bulgaria, a number of international extreme events at expert level, and last year in the pro class at six-day crazy job. So this is our opinion. Take from it what you will. You may not agree with everything. That's okay. It's your bike. You've got to ride it and you've got to get it to the end of the event. So it's important to make decisions that suit not only your riding ability, but your experience level, etc. When you look at the pros bikes, actually they got very little on them. They're very light. They don't put on a huge amount of protection. They don't carry a lot with them on their bodies. That's for very good reason. Those guys are on the bike for a very long time. They have phenomenal bike control and bike skill. They don't throw their bikes. I often tell guys at the school, hope is not a strategy. You know, it's a bit of a funny thing to say, but don't hope you're going to make it. Know you're going to make it. Visualize that you're going to make it. Commit to making it. And don't just dump your bike. You know, when you're out the mountains, you're 50 miles from anywhere. The last thing you need is a hole in the engine or a broken clutch perch or something like that. So make smart decisions. Look at the things that are relevant to you and take from this video what you will. We hope you enjoy it. One of the first things that you'll see on any bike used for competition riding, especially extreme events, is a disc protection. This is important. If you bend a front disc somewhere out in the mountains, hitting a rock or a tree stump, you generally have front brake problems because it forces the piston calipers apart, and you've got to pump that brake every time you want to use it. Especially during events where there's huge long downhills, the front discs get very, very, very hot. So does the rear, and they can bend fairly easily if you hit something. So our good buddy Grant over at Hard Enduro Designs, he makes this particular guard. It's probably the best one I've seen because it fits onto the fork and still allows you access to the pinch bolts on the axle, so you can actually very easily change front tire and front wheel. It also is a two-piece design. It wraps around the bottom of the fork, protects the bottom of the fork, and it extends back a little bit more than some of the others I've seen, so gives the front brake caliper a tiny bit of protection as well. This is another option from a Kirby's or a Chirby's, however you pronounce it. It's very, very light. It is made of sort of a carbon composite plastic, fits into the hollow of the hub, and it wraps around your caliper a tiny little bit more. So still a very good guard, maybe a bit lighter, giving more front disc protection, but not quite as strong and solid as the Hard Enduro Designs front guard. As for the rear disc, same thing. These are called shark fins. Some of them are simply a shark fin that attaches onto the standard brake caliper carrier. But again, our buddy Grant at Hard Enduro Designs makes a very good, really solid brake carrier with an integrated shark fin. These things are unbreakable. You buy them once, you move them from bike to bike, as long as KTM doesn't change it very much. This particular bike was built for me and prepped by the guys over at Eurotech KTM. They have a relationship with Enduro Engineering, and so this particular bike came with the Enduro Engineering one already fitted. It's very good. While we're here, you look at the swing arm protection. These are plastic Polysport covers that you can buy from any KTM dealer or supplier of plastic stuff. Eurotech fitted this one on here for me. They're very, very good at protecting your swing arms, especially if you do a lot of rock riding. It saves your swing arms a lot. The only thing I would recommend is take them off from time to time if you've been riding in the wet stuff, because mud does get in behind them, and the last thing you need is corroding and rotting aluminium on your swing arm. The swing arm is a very important part of the bike, so do look at that. On some bikes we also fit a solid rear disc. This is the standard rear disc that the bike comes with. The solid rear disc is very good, especially in the mud. It keeps the mud out. They're usually also a little bit thicker and stronger. They wear less. You get very even pad wear on them. So I will for sure upgrade this to a solid rear disc at the earliest opportunity. Here's an example of a solid rear disc fitted to my son's bike. You can see that there's no holes or gaps in the disc itself. Moving forward on the bike, you can see that we fit a bash guard. The bash guard really protects the frame rails of the bike and the bottom part of the engine. This one was fitted by Eurotech. They use this on a lot of their team bikes that they run. It's extremely light, very, very durable. Comes up around the side casings of the engine a little bit, and so it gives you a bit more side protection and so forth. Up here you can see I fitted an aftermarket cap on the clutch cover. That's not for reasons of bling, although it does look nice. I have actually broken a plastic cap off at the Valleys Extreme race this year. The bike tipped over, just lost my balance, and in the cold the plastic was brittle and it just snapped the cap straight off. I had to plug the hole multiple times to finish the race, and it would have been much better to run one of those little protectors. Equally here you can see that I run the Enduro Engineering larger brake tip. A lot of the Eurotech guys run them as well. It's just a little bit bigger. It just makes finding the brake that much easier. You're always confident and you know that your foot is on the brake a pedal or lever, and you can get to it even in the most awkward positions when you're doing a pivot turn or background. This here is a different example of another exhaust protection. This one is made by P-Tech. Eastern European guys, absolutely phenomenal bit of kit. Both myself and my son Jake were using these during the six-day crazy job in Bulgaria. That's a very dry event, an extremely rocky event. They do weigh more than the plastic bash guards, but they are phenomenally protective. You just will never bend a header pipe with one of these on. In the winter though, they become a bit of a mud bucket, and so be careful because they can add quite a lot of weight to your bike. We chose the version that has a plastic skid plate attached to the bottom of it. That helps a lot because aluminium guards tend to not want to slide over rocks and logs that easily, and so it's often better to go for a plastic guard if you're doing a lot of obstacles and you're confident in looking after your header pipe. Another modification that we make to all of our bikes is we change the hoses, the stock hoses, to Samco hoses. They're high strength silicone hoses. They also increase flow in your engine, from your coolant around your engine, because there's less kinks and T-pieces in the Samco hose kit. Additionally, we fit a fan. In my opinion, a fan is an absolutely crucial piece of kit for any bike being used for technical riding. You have no real idea when your bike reaches boiling temperatures other than when it actually boils, which to me is not necessarily the best indicator of an overheating engine. I prefer to run the fan. One bit of advice is leave the fan's temperature settings alone. This is a digital fan that you can buy from the Power Parts catalog. They're set to come on at 95 degrees. We have played around quite extensively with lowering that switching on point, and all it ends up doing is flattening your battery. So just leave it according to the factory settings. The other thing that we do is we run Evans coolant In the radiators, that's a waterless coolant. The boiling point is significantly higher. That's a fairly controversial thing. Not everybody agrees with it. A lot of race teams use it, and we certainly believe in it, and we've run it for years and years and years without any problems in any of our bikes. It just gives you that little bit of extra safety, not having the liquid boil and then you losing coolant along the way. It also expands less than water-based coolants. So what you sometimes have with expanding coolants is they expand, a little bit of fluid escapes out of the overflow pipe, and you're losing fluid without even knowing it. The other thing to be mindful of is you can buy 2-bar high pressure caps. I'd actually advise against that, because what ends up happening is you increase pressure around the whole system, and you may end up having hoses. If you're using stock hoses, you may have your hoses split. So leave the standard cap on. It's designed like that for a reason, and then choose how you want to cool your bike, either using the fan, adding additional protection using something like a waterless coolant like Evans. This is a clutch master protector. You can see here that it just bolts. It's basically an aluminium cover that bolts over the original clutch master. Comes with a new plastic bit to match how it fits over the chain. These are important for when you have a broken chain. Broken chain spins around and smashes the clutch master, and you end up with a clutch that doesn't work. You could be somewhere in the mountains, very far from civilization, and that's a no-no. So not a very expensive thing to do, but a very protective. And this here is a very cool little bit of kit. It's made by Nihilo Products, which is a US-based company. They cut this new throttle housing out of solid billet aluminium. It is 1,000,000 times stronger than the stock item. The stock item is made from magnesium. A lot of guys loop the bike out, the bike falls upside down, and it snaps right on top there and breaks. You can see one of the reasons why the Nihilo one is so much stronger than the stock one. If you look at the side profile, there's nothing in the gap between the top bolt and the bend, whereas if you look at the Nihilo one, they've built a little bridge that holds this bit up. That bridge is a good 10-12 millimeters wide, and so not only is it cut from solid billet aluminium, but it's supported, and it's designed unbelievably well. Expensive bit of kit, but you know, that sort of safety that you have out in the mountains, fantastic. Wraparound handguards is something else that both me and my son use. We have experimented quite a bit with the standard KTM flappy guards. We've also experimented a little bit with adding the plastic side bridge to the flappy handguards that you can buy from the Power Parts catalog. Both of those are very weak and flimsy, and they end up moving the forces to your masters, your brake master and your clutch master. And my son actually had a small fall, a tip over during 6-day crazy job last year. Nothing, he was standing still, the bike just fell over at less than 1 mile an hour, and he snapped the clutch birds off his bike, and it caused us quite a lot of problems. We use the ones from Sycra. They're not always easy to get a hold of, but in our opinion, these are the standard that all other handguards you know, are trying to get to. They're phenomenal. We usually buy them and we move them from one bike to the next bike, and so forth. You get different options. You get the ones that these are the center reach mount. They mount near your clamps. You do get other ones that mount higher up on the bar. You also get ones that mount literally across the handlebar clamps themselves. So be mindful when you order them, just to make sure you get the ones that fit not only your bar diameter but also the fitting method that you want to use. Pull straps, we don't ride without them. We love having them. In fact, in our little group of riders, we joke, we say, if you don't have pull straps, you're not getting a pull. It's important. It makes it easy for either yourself or other riders to just grab the bike when you need to maintain momentum, and just nudge you up a particular obstacle or over a log or something. Very, very useful. Make sure you fit them correctly. The guys over at Krieger, I'm sure, would like you to do that, because they've spent quite a bit of time designing them to work in the appropriate way. If you fit them in the appropriate way, it stands up like this, so that it's easy to grab and to pull on. There's guys that run it above here, which is fine. I've done that myself. It's one of those things where if you don't have cable ties with you, you haven't fitted it correctly, it's not the end of the world, but they are designed to be run this way. Another absolutely crucial thing that we fit onto our bikes are Bulletproof Designs radiator guards. These things are just on another level good, strong. We've had pretty major crashes with our bikes over the years and have never managed to successfully destroy a Bulletproof Designs radiator guard. They're extremely easy to fit, takes 5 minutes, very protective on the bike. Here's the reason why, or a good example why we recommend Bulletproof Designs rad guards. In my opinion, the best rad guards that money can buy. We were in Bulgaria doing the 6-day crazy job last year. Me and my son were racing as a team. He was riding in front of me, going about 15-20 miles an hour, and a big log, 6 or 8 inch in diameter, came in and punched him on the radiator. It bent the radiator back by a good 2 or 3 inches. We stopped, had a look at it. It threw him over the bars. It ripped his side plastics off, but in actual fact the radiator was still fine. There were no leaks. We tried to bend everything back as best as we could while the radiator was still warm, and we carried on racing. And it is now April. He's been riding with this rad guard and the same radiator since then. Still no leaks, nothing. Any other rad guard and that radiator would have been gone, and we would have been stuck in the mountains. Get Bulletproof Designs radiator guards. The other handy tip is that you can, if you're very, very careful, attach spare gear or clutch and brake levers to these Bulletproof Designs rad guards. The one word of warning though is make sure they are strapped down insanely well, because we have had one of our riders, one came loose and prevented his bike from turning, and he had a small crash because of it. So be mindful to strap them down with extremely strong cable ties, but it's a nice place for you to take weight off your back and put it on the bike. This is a 2020 300 EXC TPI. We've on this bike also fitted an X-Grip TPS metal protector. On the standard one is just a flimsy little plastic unit. This is a 250-300 pound part. If you break it, this controls the TPI fuel injection, and so we would highly recommend looking at some way of protecting your TPS sensor in that. The other upgrade we've made on the 2020 bike, this unit here, which is the fuel T-piece, is actually plastic. No idea why KTM have done that, but we have bought a unit from a 19 bike, and we've changed that to aluminium. We've actually seen somebody with a plastic one just have a small tip over, the front of the hose connector snapped off, and that was it. The guy was stuck in the mountains, and it's not a very expensive part. It's absolutely worth doing, so get yourself the aluminium version. The other item we fitted is an exhaust flange protector. What that does is protects the flange on the front of the engine where your header pipe goes into the engine itself. I've actually personally experienced smashing a pipe on that side. It forced the pipe up and it broke the flange. That flange protector is 30 quid, 35 quid. Whereas if you break the original flange on the engine, you're talking about 200-250 pounds for replacement front flange, and very difficult to fit, because in some ways the engine needs to come out and all that sort of stuff. So again, for 30 pounds, not a lot of weight, it's a worthwhile thing to have. That's often something, the flange braking is often something that happens when guys fit the carbon protectors, because what the carbon protector does is they look beautiful, but it actually transfers forces to the neck of the header pipe, so be mindful of that. The reason why we're running this pipe clear or clean is I'd rather have dents in the pipe than smash up any other bits of the bike. So the pipe sort of becomes, in a way, a sacrificial unit. On our 300 TPI bikes, what we do is we run a fuel sock. What that does is it prevents any debris from inside the fuel tank or in the fuel ending up in your system. These bikes do have fuel filters in the fuel tanks, but this provides sort of that first step protection before even getting to that filter. In our opinion, it's a no-brainer. You stick one of these on, especially when you race internationally. You never know what quality fuel you get, how contaminated some of the fuel tanks or fuel cans and things are that you find in the mountains. So definitely a worthwhile upgrade. The other thing that we fit is a rear brake reservoir extender. What this does is it adds a little bit of fluid to your system, but also it adds a little heat sink to keep that fluid cooler. So the only place where we've ever really had boiling brake problems were in on the long downhills in Romania, and on some of the long downhills on at 6 Day Crazy Job in Bulgaria. Both those are very high heat events. Roof of Africa, same thing. The year that we raced it, it was 44 to 46 degrees Celsius every day, and then some of the hills are really long and steep down. So it's a worthwhile thing to have. They're not very expensive. Yeah. The other thing to be mindful of is it could, in theory, you know, get you to hit it a bit more because it's more extended. If you drop the bike and a rock hits it, it could be a case that it adds a little bit of problem. So think long and hard before you just you buy it and you stick it on. You've got to be mindful that it's there, and you've got to be careful of it. Okay. Another very handy tip is to tighten your clamp's pinch bolt a bit more to stiffen up the steering just a fraction. Not a huge amount, but just a little bit, so that when the bike is up in the air, the handlebar doesn't fall back on itself. This really helps by stabilizing the bike, especially at speed, and just saves a little bit of energy on the hands. Another very handy tip is to snap a Risk Racing Seal Doctor onto the top of your handlebars. It just means it's always there when you're riding in messy, mucky conditions. Anyway, if you notice a small leak, you can nudge down the fork seal and you can get up to the oil seals, clean them real quick, pop your seal back on, and you just snap this back on. Easy to take on, easy to snap on. It sits there beautifully. This is a 2020 300 EXC TPI. As you can see, we fitted a kickstart kit. Well, actually Eurotech has fitted a kickstart kit. Thanks Nick and Robbo and the guys. On top of that, what we've done is we've fitted a capacitor kit. Now what happens on the TPI bikes is when the battery runs completely flat, you're unable to kick the bike anymore. The capacitor kit is there because hopefully the capacitor were charging up a little bit while you were riding, and at that point has enough voltage in it to drive the fuel pump in the tank, squirt a little bit of fuel into the engine so that the engine can fire up. There are some other guys on the internet right now that make pre-charge harnesses as well for the capacitors, just in case your capacitor has at that point lost its charge and you need to pre-charge it before you can fire up the bike. But definitely a handy addition to the 2020 TPI bikes. Let's talk about gearing real quick. So for the most part, we run standard gearing at pretty much every UK Hare and Hounds and time card event. 1350 seems to be a really good compromise for most events in terms of speed and capability of the bike, and also our skill level. I'm sure there are some pros that ride at speeds much greater than ours. They tend to probably run a 1450 combination and so forth. When it comes to really technical riding and extreme enduros, I personally now prefer 1248 in the more extreme kind of riding. 1248 is exactly the same as 1352, except the sprockets are smaller. Gives you a bit more protection against the rocks, especially at the back, the large rear sprocket. The 12 front sprockets do wear faster, so keep an eye on those, but they're not very expensive, so you can carry a couple in your toolbox as a spare. I used to run 1250. Some guys still prefer 1250. 1250 makes the bike a bit more trialsy, so for the really slow, really pivot turny technical kind of stuff, 1250 might be a good option to try out. It makes second gear very usable up to a certain point. And the reason I've recently gone up to 1248 is actually to stretch my second gear out a bit and give third gear a bit more legs. So try and find the gearing that works for you. One important note is not the same gearing doesn't work for everybody. Your body weight does actually play a role. Larger guys might think 1250 is amazing, whereas a much lighter guy might think 1350 is amazing. Play around with it, see what gearing works for you, for your riding style and your riding type. When it comes to suspension setup, as for the rear shock, I'm 6 foot. I still run a small spacer, a 5mm spacer inside the shock. It lowers the rear of the bike for me to get my feet nice and flat down on the ground really comfortably. I still run the right spring for my body weight, so I don't compromise on running a lighter spring. I am actually running the correct spring for my body weight, but I moved the shock positioning down a bit by fitting a spacer. You can speak to guys like Julian Stevens. He revalves them. He fits a very low, super low friction piston in them. All of that is really worthwhile doing. It makes small bump sensitivity a bit better on the shock, especially for a PDS shock. It's definitely a worthwhile upgrade, and he'll also revalve it so that it's better on the progressive damping kind of situation. Looking at the rear brake tip, you can see that the brake tip sits a fraction higher than the foot peg. We do that so that we can reach it while standing up. Also, when you're hanging off the back of the bike, that's a useful place for it to be, because you can actually reach it. As for the clutch and brake levers, we run them fairly neutral. They're relatively high up. They're not dipping down a lot like some mountain bike guys do. Again, that's so that you can reach them when you hang off the back of the bike. You're reaching, you're doing a pivot turn, all that sort of stuff. You can actually get to the lever. Also, when you're standing up, you tend to rest your wrist more on the handlebar, which means you take a little bit of weight off the rest of your body, just to save a bit of energy. Another pro tip is fit a grippy seat cover. This is one of the first things that we do to any of our bikes. It helps massively with you sticking to the bike, not falling off the back when you're trying to do a pivot turn, or when you get a little bit wet, muddy, and it starts wasting a huge amount of energy for you to try and hold yourself onto your bike with your arms. The grippy seat cover just helps in every kind of scenario to keep you closer to the bike. Definitely a worthwhile upgrade.